Hey there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Whenever you happen to discover this, my name is Patrick Lovell. I'm recording this on Thursday, September 4th, 2025, approximately 11 a.m. my time. And my name is, as I've mentioned, Patrick Lovell. I'm also a producer, but I'm also an activist. And I just thought I'd speak from the heart for a few minutes while swinging for the fences because I'm at the intersection of everything that's happening, and I've been on a very incredible journey for a very long time, and I need you to hear me. I hope that well, it's more that you need to hear me. And that's not an ego thing. I can assure you, I'm not in this because I'm trying to be the savior. I'm not. I really would prefer not to be in this situation, but unfortunately, I've got my life invested in it and I've sacrificed so much to get into the situation. But now the clarity of everything that I've been in the midst of for a very long time is all coming to a head. And the way we pivot in the next direction is going to determine really probably the rest of our lives. That may end sooner than later, depending on the outcome of a lot of things that are in play. So, just a little bit about me first. So, I have been on this journey. I think my journey started for this realm of my life, let's see, I guess we're about 16 years ago. I'm 56 years old. I'll be 57 in October. And it was the 2008 great financial crisis. Literally, I was approaching my 40th birthday. And I was in a scenario where, because I was kind of this young entrepreneur, I was kind of hip, I'm, involved with production and Hollywood and film and TV and all these other types of things. And I'm an entrepreneur. And up to that time period, I had always been able to be successful at putting together deals as an independent guy, at least the previous 10 years prior to that. And I was kind of reaching a zenith. I was reaching a threshold to where it was like I was about to take off. And I recall at the time, my wife and we were living the American Dream 101. We had this wonderful family situation. It was everything that I'd ever wanted. I had gotten started late just because of the amount of time it took me to get into the position that I had been at that point. But eventually, the world would collapse on my head right about this time period, 16 years ago. September 15th, 2008 was the day that would change my life. Just like, the Great Depression changed everybody from that generation and so on and so forth. And as a result of that, it jettisoned me in a scenario where my life basically felt like I got trapped in the aftermath of the whitewash for anybody who surfed of a giant wave, and I was getting ragdolled all over the place, and or maybe in the crosshairs of an avalanche, so to speak. And I live in a mountain state, and I know how to snowboard and surf, so I know those two analogies well. And I was getting crushed at a time where I really needed to be the best version of myself, but everything was collapsing around me, and I was in desperate straits, and also in a straitjacket at the same time because of just the nature of when you're an entrepreneur, when you're a producer, you go out and you get money for projects because people invest in projects because there's going to be an ROI. It's just the nature of most business, and media is not any different, although we've certainly changed over the years. And one thing led to another over the course of the next 4 years after that event. I went through hell. I went through a situation where, I was trapped. I felt like literally I was thrown out into a desert naked with my family on my back. And I was looking around for water and, I don't know, housing or something. I mean, just anything for safety is what I'm trying to say. And it was nowhere to be found. And next thing you know, I'm just through this insanity. But simultaneously, as I'm holding on for dear life, I'm like looking for answers as to what created this situation. And because I'm an entrepreneur in what I do, I was able to put something together that miraculously led to what would become literally the next 16 years of my life. And over that course of time, I was able to produce a number of films. One was a premiere documentary called Forward 13, Waking Up the American Dream. And the next was a series of a television series called The Con that you can find for free at thecon.tv, which is the blueprint for how all this works. And, I apologize to those who know who I am, who see this and hear from me and know my story. but I'm really broadcasting to somebody who don't know who I am, but to also reiterate to everybody who knows my story that everything that I've been telling you now for years, and I think on this YouTube channel, I'm up to 656 truth bombs, some ranging in time from an hour to 11 hours in one of the most prolific truth bombs I've ever done called Deception Owns You, which reveals everything that I'm about to say. So I'd encourage anybody who's just discovering this, and those of you who know me on the periphery, dig in. Just pick up any random truth bomb that I've been saying over the course of the last 3 years, and then plug it into the moment that we're living in. And I find this to be somewhat of a, I don't know, because I'm a cinematic guy and I love movies and everything else, and I love stories, and I used to love reading growing up, and I love fiction, but I love science fiction and all of the other things. So I can think of all of these different types of movies and characters that would personify what it is that I'm saying. But nothing says it better than the stupid reality that we're in the midst of, that I've been trying to get people to understand for years and years and years throughout all of my work. And all of that goes from the con to the new Untouchables, the Pecora Files, which is also available on YouTube, which then leads us, that I've developed with my colleague and my sister in arms, Roseanne Rabiella Mile, which you see behind me, the Clean New Deal, which you can find at thecleannewdeal.org. But to understand how to fix problems, you got to understand what the solutions are and what possibilities are. You got to understand what the problems are. And everything that I've been talking about for as long as I have has not been demonstrated more clearly and evidently than Donald Trump and this administration. Everything that's happened in the second incarnation of Chumpstein, the Chumpenstein, Chumpzilla, and Don the Con and Rico Pig, in the context of what we saw yesterday in the flyovers over the victims of Epstein trying to share their truth in a way to basically knock over a domino in an initiative of the Epstein Transparency Act, to be able to reveal all of the elements that are involved, but particularly the people that were involved that are being protected by the highest order of law that were involved with. Most people respond to it as raping children, which they did, which we call pedophilia, right? Which is disgusting, because the issue is, and this is what came out of the mouths of the victims of Epstein, was they were saying there are two sets of laws. And I couldn't believe my eyes when Marjorie Taylor Greene, somebody who I refer to as Mr. Ed, who was on the complete polar opposite of everything that I stand for, was saying similar things to what I'd be saying, right? She's like, we got to get rid of the polarization. We've got to reach across the aisle. We've got to be able to put the power of the government in the hands of the people for which it was designed. I couldn't believe this was coming out of her mouth. To be able to illustrate that there are elites, there are two systems of law, and that the elites are above the law. Now, Marjorie couldn't go further than that because she's a liar, and I think she was a plant, and I think she's a Trojan horse. And all I could see was the picture that I use all the time in social media of Donald Trump, the Joker, straight out of Gotham, over her shoulder laughing, because it's like, she's like, I'm not afraid to name names, because none of these women can name names because they'll be sued into oblivion. And there's reasons they'd be sued into oblivion, including that they all got paid off by none other than Chase, which is the largest bank in the United States. Okay. And there's a reason for that. And I'm one of the reasons that you can understand what all of that means, which is integral to everything that I'm revealing to you. But really, what it all comes down to, and what you all know, is that we live in an ocean of madness created by lies in every dimension and everything that we experience. Our phones, mainstream media, social media, misinformation, disinformation, confused people, honest people trying to find answers and solutions that have no capacity or ability to do it. And I'll tell you, on my journey, I was able to aggregate millions of dollars to do tens of thousands of work to connect with the experts and the whistleblowers and the evidence that the entirety of the institutions of our country couldn't do on behalf of the American people, that would ultimately lead to what Marjorie Taylor Greene, of all people, would profess yesterday on the steps of the People's House in Congress, right? At the Capitol. And a lot of people get lost in the minutia or confusion or the details because they don't have the capacity. Yeah, it takes a lot to be able to do the work of the sum total of the institutions of the United States government. So the work that we did in the con, for example, basically delivered for the people in the con at the con.tv with the $90 billion apparatus of the Department of Justice, the FBI, the Securities and Exchange Commission, state AGs from around the country, and that means attorneys general, for those of you who don't know, which is pretty much the circumference, including a whole garden variety of what we call regulatory agencies that include the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency and then the Office of Thrift Supervision before. So when you're listening to me, you're listening to a guy that's got a $4.5 million education in reality because I got crushed by the system 16 years ago. But see, what I knew before that system blew up because of my background, and those of you who know who I am, I grew up in Houston, Texas, in the oil and gas sort of paradigm that is one of the largest contributors of the corporate hegemony of the world. Fossil fuel, finance, military industrial complex. I grew up with that. I already knew all of those types of things before. And through my experience in my life evolution and everything else, through my studies and being involved with a lot of the things that I was involved with, especially understanding paradigms and systems, I knew in the 90s that we were on our way to a renewable energy revolution. In fact, as an entrepreneur and understanding solar and wind and geothermal and many things that I would discover later, and hydrogen and other activities of how you can merge all of those things and what the technology is to do that, but particularly the financial apparatus that could actually do that within a geopolitical / governmental sort of commitment to that on behalf of the American people, because you got to understand macroeconomics if you're going to understand God in the United States, because what is our God? It's the dollar. That's what owns everything. And he who has the gold makes the rules, right? It's always the same thing throughout history. And I already had that base understanding, that knowledge that we have to move to a renewable energy paradigm to create sustainability of the dynamic, upwardly mobile middle class, of the sustainability of the world, which in my estimation would then lead to furthering, in order to form a more perfect union by way of liberty and justice for all, and for everybody who celebrates, beauty and sustainability. Look, I'm the kind of person, that's progressive. I believe, and by the way, you should look at my sort of ideology as an analogy to action sports and really sports in general, because I'm a competitor. But I grew up skateboarding and mogul skiing and surfing and water skiing. And, that was my youth. And I've evolved into all of the other things like windsurfing and yada, yada, yada. But there's a dynamic sort of corollary when you become good at something in any of those categories. And anybody who's ever, chased being a skateboarder, for example, and I think I might put skateboarders at the top of the list of people that I respect, because, and you can see it all the time in these videos that emanate out of social media, particularly on my feeds that I get in on TikTok when I watch it and so on and so forth that I'm plugged into. Skateboarders that are trying a maneuver, a trick over and over and over at great sacrifice to their body, right? I'll see these guys that'll like descend down these rails on a staircase like 100 feet and just wipe out in a way that is extremely painful. That takes dedication. I said after 9/11, for example, when they had the homicide bombers, that flew themselves for Allah and whatever, 19, I don't know, virgins in for eternity and something absolutely ridiculous, that, the ridiculousness of their sacrifice. No. Sacrifice are the guys in action sports who sacrifice their body, ragdoll, get their ass kicked, and then get up and do it again. And then the best rise to the top. It's called the meritocracy. Yeah, that's progress. That's why we always, when we're watching the X Games, you hear the announcers talking about, the progression, whatever the category is. Shaun White and snowboarding back in the day and everything that's happened with all these Japanese bombers. And I don't mean to digress, but the corollary is that in the United States, in my opinion, that the the nature of those who want to achieve and become the very best, we celebrate that. Doesn't matter what sport it is and everything else. We celebrate the best amongst us, and you can't pretend your way to achievement. You sacrifice, you pay the price, you feel the pain, and you get up and you do it again and again and again. That's what I've been doing for the past 16 years as I bang my head against your consciousness and your lack thereof and your stubbornness not to wrap your mind around what we all have to come to understand, that corruption is the enemy, that corruption is the tumor, the cancer that is metastasized throughout our entire body politic, throughout our entire global financial paradigm. And it is destroying us on overload right now. Now, 14 years ago, I remember having this epiphany. I was approaching New York City after traveling with my colleague Eric Vaughn, making our first film, Forward 13, Waking Up the American Dream, where we had already traveled something like 6,900 miles, attending, I want to say, by that time, I would know, 22 Occupy encampments, trying to piece together what we were all protesting and realizing in the aftermath of the great financial crisis, the 2008 financial crisis that destroyed my life. And that was my first endeavor into trying to understand the truth that turned my life upside down. And I kept pulling on the threads, getting more and more chapters, finding ways and miracles to be able to keep this thing going to where I was able to do the work with my colleagues that the $90 billion apparatus of the United States couldn't do for our country, that enabled the corruption in the shadows to exist and to thrive because of all of the things that I reveal here on my truth bombs that have led to this moment. And oh yeah, it's undergirded completely by the oil financial paradigm. I could go on tangent about, talking about all of the, scenarios, but trust me, I've got many truth bombs that do that. But we're in a situation where I've been warning for the past 3 years in my truth bombs that corruption births and fuels fascism, that we're going to become a fascist state. We're there. We're an authoritarian state led by what I call the Mad Magazine Mad King. Like I said, hashtag Don the Con Rico Pig. The entire government is a racketeering enterprise. Donald Trump has already pocketed, backdoored over $5 billion since he took presidency about 7 months ago. What? Did you hear what I said? Over $5 billion. Now, I thought it was like 10 billion a while ago, but let's just say it's safe to say 5 billion. Okay. Now, maybe a lot of that's on paper, and it's coming from a lot of different sorts of, maneuverings of grift. That's what this junkie of Khan has been doing his entire career. And yet, supposedly 72 million of us voted for him. Now, I'm sure they stole the presidency. I cite Greg Palast's work on all of the things that they'd done vis-a-vis the sort of Jim Crow scenarios and the swing states. And I think we can account for up to 3.5 million votes that were stolen, but it's more than that. I'm sure it has something to do with the terminals. And I know that there was all sorts of scenarios, oddities that just are statistically impossible. And so there's that. But the Biden administration rolled over. They rolled over the second, for example, and many of you have heard me make this argument before, that the Supreme Court said that the president is above the law. He's immune from the law when doing the work for the American people. That's what they said when they were addressing, obviously, the Colorado lawsuit that made it to the Supreme Court that would take Trump off the ballot because of the 14th Amendment, Section 3, which came out of the Civil War, that says if you're involved with insurrection, you can't run for an office of the land. And they etch-a-sketch that because the Supreme Court is corrupt. And they're corrupt because of all of the other elements that I've talked about. So the Supreme Court's corrupt, Congress is corrupt, the media is corrupt, universities are quite frankly corrupt. What have we seen over the course of the last 5 months? We've seen tall building law firms capitulate to Donald Trump and basically throw out any engagement to sue the administration and get on to working for him pro bono in scenarios that are important to his propaganda. Same with universities. And why would they all do that? Because they're all sucking from the teat of corruption. And it works in a variety of ways, most of which I continue to show you through the Clean New Deal and Patrick Lovell Truth Bombs the Con. But we're not waiting for authoritarianism. We're not waiting for fascism. We're seeing ICE get an unbelievable budget to where they're getting more in terms of the federal budget than are the Marines. For guys to be behind masks to go and do what basically is a paramilitary arm, private, military arm of this corrupt president of the United States, who I probably need not remind you, but is a guy who is covering for pedophilia. And the elites, like you said he wouldn't, to all of you MAGAs out there that are like Marjorie Taylor Greene going, no, we got to know what the Epstein files mean and who's being protected. We've got to take them down. That's why we put you in the presidency. There's obviously a lot of more reasons that Trump was able to manipulate because of Elon Musk and all of the other billionaires that were on his side. And then when, of course, Trump got, inaugurated, I mean, we had the 7 richest guy, no, 13. There's 13, which is a big number in my life. 13 billionaires in the cabinet of this Trump administration. It's the billionaires and the technocrats that work for him that pulled this hijacking, that's created a coup d'etat that has destroyed the United States. That's already happened. We're living in the aftermath. And now people are just discovering it because why? Because 300,000 people who were working and comfortable in places like the Department of Education or in the Veterans Affairs Administration or everything else, when they weren't exactly comfortable, but they weren't coming out of their silos to fight a revolution because they had their job, they had their pensions, but they don't now. And that goes for, I just happened to read an article that I believe it was the giant Shell, or maybe it was one of the big oil companies that are actually cutting 13,000 jobs. I'm like, wow, how about that? While their profits are probably soaring. So as Marjorie Taylor Greene identified yesterday, and I hate to cite her, but she's right. There are 2 levels of justice. The law for the 99%, which is the law comes down hard, and then freedom and liberty and complete just ownership of our democracy by what is the top 0.1%. And there's a way they got away with this, and it's all in my work. And I unpack it every single day. And I've got all of the answers that connect Epstein to Wall Street, to the bailouts, to the Federal Reserve, to the Supreme Court, and much, much more. But also that gives the story to the tens of millions of people that got set up in the 2008 great financial crisis that weren't just homeowners and weren't just minorities. But it was attached to the working class and regular people and professionals and pensions. It got the whole world. And when it blew up, nobody got bailed out except for the guys that engineered this madness. So it's just like what we're seeing over and over in the courts. Diddy got away with racketeering, even though it was a fault of, quite frankly, the prosecutors who didn't really fight for the RICO conviction. They completely, wiped out in terms of how to present that case. And there's probably reasons for that. But as I said yesterday, the corollary between, in a pop culture sort of reference, Weinstein, Epstein, P. Diddy, they all operate on complicity, duplicity, hypocrisy, and ultimately being above the law. Now, of course, you could argue that Harvey Weinstein's in prison, is going to rot there and die there. He got away with it for 3 decades. You could say, well, Diddy's still in jail. Yeah, okay. He'll get out. And he'll probably profit immeasurably for this because of things that have gone down. But, I could go on. I'm not going to litigate the Diddy. The reference, though, is that there was a complicity machine to basically prey, which we call predation, on the weak. That's what they do. They prey on your weakness. The whole system pisses on your head, telling you it's rain, because it's the absolute monstrosity of the perverse inverse of what this country is supposed to be about. A country that had a revolution against tyranny to create liberty and justice for all through, of course, the structure of the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. And the only way that exists is through the integrity of character. Just like a plane can't fly if it doesn't have integrity, just like a ship can't float, just like the lights on the streets can't work, and the elevators in our office buildings, and everything else in modern society, including this technology that I'm using to broadcast to you now. But the details matter. The who did what, when, and how, and what they got away with matters above all else, because it leads to what is behind me, the money, our God, which is insane. How is it that Don the Con Rico Pig, a guy who's been married, 3 times, he's probably cheated more times than we could ever count. Obviously, we think that he might have been involved with underage women and the whole litany of stuff that comes from Epstein. We know that Melania came from an introduction from Epstein. We know that Trump was flying around on the Lolita Express during the campaign. Again, this is the Mad Magazine, Mad King to, combine the satire of my youth and Game of Thrones for those who don't quite understand the pop culture aspect of it. And this guy is the president with over $5 billion, and the president's supposed to get paid $460,000, and he gets a 747. The corruption is insane. The Supreme Court of the United States, who is there to be the ultimate arbiter and umpire of the laws of the United States, predicated on the American Revolution and the development ever since, completely betrayed us. We don't have separation of powers. And media is propaganda. And they all capitulated. And all of them are working to destroy you and the world that we live in. And it's predicated on everything from war, and you can include genocide in that fact, but overreach in terms of authoritarianism and, of course, fascism, which, of course, millions of Americans waged war against, and 1 million died, or slightly less than that, but more sacrifice than you could ever possibly imagine, alongside our allies, and, of course, the sacrifice of the Soviet Union to basically pulverize the Nazis. That was the world that we inherited. And oh yeah, we lost our, heroes for liberty and justice in order to form a more perfect union in the 60s with the Reverend Martin Luther King trying to have the United States live to what it, put down on paper, live true to what it put down on paper. Of course, he's assassinated. John Kennedy's assassinated. Housley's assassinated. Robert F. Kennedy assassinated. We turn the page. We go to, Vietnam. People get tired of it. There's the protests, the eruptions all over the country, the chaos. And then we have, Watergate. And then what happens after? The oil embargo, that chaos. And then we ended up with basically what's created the world that we've lived in ever since, the Reagan administration, which knocked down all of the regulations and then got involved with none other than the world that we live in, that we're all still in the midst of. Ever hear of Contragate? Do you know who the players of Saudi Arabia and, let's just say, all the big financiers and Wall Street and the military industrial complex and all the big oil, all the stuff that emanates from my hometown, H-Town, Houston, Texas? Yeah, they're still in control. More control than ever before. Donald Trump is connected to all of that. And I could give you the dissertation on every single bit of it. I could talk for 15 hours nonstop. Trust me, I have. I got to bring this to a close. I'm trying to get you to understand, people, there's only one way out of this. It's everything that's in the Clean New Deal. You can find that at www.thecleannewdeal.org. And I can assure you that the Democratic Party does not have answers. The Democratic Party, and everybody who's asking you for money now, guys who are running for Senate, I saw last night, even though I hate to watch her, I thought I was going to tune in a little early to watch Lawrence O'Donnell last night. And God, I can't even think of her name because I tried to block her out, the redhead who replaced Rachel Maddow. Funny, I can't even think of her, who was the basically the press secretary for Obama, which is the reason why I can't stand her, because she has no idea about any of this stuff and she's just a figurehead. But she was talking to Senator Ossoff from Georgia, and he's asking for money, and he's asking for money for a campaign to do what exactly? If a Democrat's not saying we're going to throw Donald Trump in prison and we're going to take down the apparatus of this insane Republican betrayal, that's a fascist state that has destroyed our laws, destroyed our traditions, destroyed the last 40 years of American history. For what? To return us to the Confederacy or to the era of robber barons, both of which they're fine to work for, because that's all they do. That's all of this apparatus of power does. They serve the billionaires, the oligarchs, the robber barons. That's not democracy. That's not the rule of law. That's not separation of powers. That's not the United States of America. It's the end of the world, is what it is. And I could go into the precepts of the Clean New Deal and everything else. You need to do that yourself. You really do. But I can tell you right now, I have the $71 trillion truth that made it all so. And by the way, that number is huge as it is. There's a 1,000 billion and a trillion. The world's richest man, Elon Musk, I think might be worth over $400 billion today. That's an ungodly sum. That's more probably in real value than the pharaohs of Egypt and the kings of Western Europe, Game of Thrones and all of that. No, what I'm revealing to you is on the low end. And I'm sure it's much, much bigger. The $71 trillion truth. It's not rocket science. It's racketeering. This is the RICO government. There are ways to turn the tables on this madness. And we're involved with it. I work with the best prosecutors and former members of the regulatory agencies out of the Department of Justice and also state AGs, and the best of the best of the best. The guys that, if you were to use sports analogies, I mean, the Michael Jordans, I probably shouldn't refer to, because some people, there's always haters out there, but Tom Brady and, so on and so forth, right? You name your favorite player, the most impactful players from every sports. And that's who these guys are on behalf of liberty and justice for all. And yeah, we're fighting, and we've got a plan to fight. And the fight, it's what it's called, the fight platform and the restore package. And also this is to deliver a midterm response. And I got to give some credit here to Mark Elias, a guy that I'm a little bit skeptical of just because he was Hillary Clinton's general counsel, and that made him part and parcel to Eric Holder, and Eric Holder's the reason all of this stuff is happening. But I do like Mark Elias. I think he's a great guy, and he is fighting in a very heroic way. But of course, he's funded, and he's got a huge infrastructure, and he's got big money behind him, so he's not hurting. But he's doing the good fight as it relates to gerrymandering and all of the states that are trying to steal the election for Donald Trump once again, which they're going to do. There's no question about it. But outside of him, in that particular initiative, the Democrats do not have a plan, and they never have. Not Bernie Sanders, not Elizabeth Warren, not AOC, not anyone, to be able to defeat corruption. And I can assure you, I'm not a socialist, and nor am I a communist. I'm an entrepreneur. I am a producer. That's what I do. That's what I've been doing my entire existence. I understand the dynamism of energy, and that's why sports are such a big influence in my life and what I do, and I've always done, and what I appreciate. But we've got to move that mentality into the political arena, where millions of you have to get ignited to become a nuclear reaction vector to the Big Bang of truth, to be able to blast the light into the darkness of the madness in the oceans of betrayal and deception and all the stuff that's really, deception is what it's been for the last 15 years. Now it's all out in the open. But still, it's so huge, people can't put their arms around it. And it really isn't that difficult, but you've got to put your faith in those who know how to defeat this madness. And I'm your guy. I'm not running for office, even though I have been asked to run for office and Senate in my home state. And I might consider it downstream, but I am the producer. I'm the guy that's got all the story. I am the vortex of this whole thing. I'm in the eye of the hurricane. I'm the guy who's the spoke of the wheel that can get to all of the people that can move and make things happen in all of the different ways that need to happen. And I'm your conduit to that. I really am. And nobody in the Democratic Party is going to tell you what I am. You know why? How I know that? Because they never have. That's the whole purpose of my mission. That's the whole person. And it's gotten more important every step of the way. It's gotten more validated, and it's gotten more unbelievable. And if you don't like me because I'm a white guy, the protagonist of which the story that was the ultimate tragedy that led to the revelation of everything I'm telling you is the story of Addie Pohl. A 91-year-old African-American woman who we discovered had to shoot herself in the chest 5 times when she was being evicted from a home that she had lived in for 4 decades, that she owned outright, thoroughly, paid for, that she got stolen from her by the system and nobody would listen, so she had to commit suicide. That's like millions of you out there. That's the direction we're going. That's the feeling that these women that were victims of Epstein had. How is it that the law doesn't work for the guys above us? Because of everything I'm telling you. You got to put your you got to put your faith into people who are strong, into people who have the ability to fight back, which I do. But if millions of you join me, we will crush corruption. We will drown the fascism it fuels. We will purge the misery of tyranny to unleash the renaissance of possibility. So in closing, like I always say, if you, me, and everyone you see who isn't a Nazi, and I'm not a Nazi, and fascism is my ultimate enemy, but corruption is pretty much up there too, because they're two sides of the same coin. If you, me, and everybody you see, who believes in liberty and justice, and integrity, and dignity, and decency, and beauty, and sustainability, and liberty, when we merge in unity behind the Clean New Deal, which is our destiny, we will triumph. And we will destroy that which is destroying us. This is the long game. This is what's been going on for a long time, but it's all coming to a head now. And I've been on this pathway for 16 years. Really, it's 13 years in terms of getting paid for it and being in the belly of the beast and everything else. I had to survive the whitewash first. And by the way, I'm not getting paid to do this now, just so you know. And we're giving you the $71 trillion truth for free. But I will say on our website, if you want to support the Clean New Deal, which I hope you will, we've got swag that's freaking amazing. And if you look around at all the red hats made in China, that all these idiots got swindled to be able to stand on their fake Bibles as well with their gold watches and yada, yada, yada. Yeah, you know that if everybody's wearing the same hat, it helps. And the Clean New Deal is a pretty damn cool hat to wear, or backpack, or sticker, or whatever. And we've got all that merch that you can check out. And I would encourage you to do so. But we're giving you the $71 trillion truth for free. That can change everything. So thank you for listening. Please like, subscribe, and share. And I hope you'll join us. If you have any questions, I'm always available. We've got to build an army of people who are willing to go the distance. And everything is embedded in the cleannewdeal.org. Onwards and upwards, my friends. This is the righteous grind to change the world. We can do this. Thank you.